Okay guys, angler profile here for the boss man himself. We got a couple of questions we wrote out we're going to go through here and kind of learn a little bit about the man himself, fishing the odds. So number one,
Sea lion.
what got you into fishing and how old were you?
That's kind of a tough question, I would say, because I didn't start fishing younger like a lot of people did in this industry, especially the salmon steelhead industry. It seems like a lot of people have been brought up doing this, but for me, I actually started fishing in a place called Salish Ponds, and it was a little pond in Troutdale, Gresham, Oregon, you know, for those of you who don't know Troutdale. But basically I would go down there with like a little worm and just make a cast, catch a bass, catch a trout, whatever. That got me into fishing, but it never stuck, right? Like, I didn't pursue fishing after that. It was just very short moment in time where I figured it was something to do, right? But I was never addicted at that point. So what actually got me into fishing was, this is gonna sound kind of bad, but the mother of my daughter, she got pregnant, and I needed a chance to get out of the house. So I started to, I followed some guys on YouTube called John B, Alex Perrick, like the Googans, right? The bass fishermen of the Midwest. So I followed them, and I would see them catching fish on GoPros, like bass, smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, panfish, you know, various sorts of panfish. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go buy a GoPro. Perfect time to get out of the house. My woman's pregnant. We're clashing a little bit, so I need to get out of the house. I bought a little GoPro and I started casting down by the bridges on the Willamette River and stuff and catching smallmouth bass. That's kind of how Fishing the Odds started, and that's what actually got me into fishing. Shortly after that, I met a guy named Frugal Fishing Fundamentals. He had a small YouTube channel at the time as well. This is about 6 years ago. And Frugal Fishing invited me in the comment section of one of my Fishing the Odds videos, and he said, hey, I've been known to have a spot on my boat for salmon fishing for spring Chinook. And I said, cool, I don't know nothing about it, but yeah, I'll go, you know. I went with him and started just putting a bait on a hook, man. Triangle flasher, bumper leaders, herring, just the whole nine. I got addicted. It was so rad to get out there in the morning. We had our camo on, we're in the outdoors, and we're just experiencing life how it should be experienced. And that's actually what got me into fishing. GoPro, following the guys in the Midwest, led me to getting to know Mike, Frugal Fishing, which got me on my boat, got me on his boat, spring Chinook fishing. Caught my first spring salmon with the guy, and I was just hooked. I mean, and now the ocean is my home, but it started there with Frugal Fishing inviting me on his boat, and for that I am forever grateful. I never got to grow up fishing. I never had the money or the privilege to be able to get on a boat even and just go out on lakes. I mean, we didn't have that growing up, so I kind of created it for myself, but Frugal was the guy who got me into salmon fishing.
Okay, so with that, why don't you go ahead and try and describe what your fondest fishing memory or experience would be?
So there's a couple. I mean, my dad and I, we weren't real big into fishing growing up, but we got a couple acres in Lapine, Oregon. For those of you guys who don't know, that's Central Oregon. It's kind of by Bend, and there's a lot of lakes. You're talking 10 lakes in 20 miles. Like, there's so many lakes up there. And we rented a little boat. It's a little like 12-foot, 13-foot John boat, just a little aluminum, and we would just drive around. It's my first time running a kicker motor too, and you know, I was like 14, 15 years old, so like you could tell how much I didn't go on boats growing up. I was 14, 15 years old, and one of my first times on a boat, and we were on Paulina Lake in Central Oregon, and I caught a limit of trout, and I have a picture somewhere where I'm holding up a stringer of trout, 5 rainbows. My brother's holding up 5 rainbows. And it was an awesome memory, one that I hold dear with me, just with my father and I, my brother. That was a really cool memory. That's probably my favorite memory. There's a couple other little ones I got. My first spring Chinook salmon ever was on the news with Frugal Fishing Fundamentals. He was the guy that got me into salmon fishing, and the first one I ended up catching ended up being on the news, so I thought that was pretty cool. So we'll stick with those two, but those are my fondest memories to date. There's one with Brandon and I fighting a giant steelhead too. Actually, no, I'll go ahead and tell that. So
I was gonna say I left out like 20 with me and you. That's not fair.
yeah. No, so for me, that's a super fond memory of mine. Was Brandon and I were out of town fishing a river in the Olympic Peninsula, just on the bottom end of the peninsula, and basically I had snapped off my bead. Like, we're doing bobbers and beads, like that's how we're fishing. I had snapped off my bead, and I'm like, Brandon, can I grab your rod? And as you guys know, he doesn't know how to fish. He has his spin reel right hand, right? Spin reel should be left hand, everybody knows that. So anyway, I pick it up and I'm reading the water and I make one cast with Brandon's setup. It's got a right hand reel, it's got a little, I think 10 mil bead at the time. It was a hard bead. And I hate hard beads, for those of you who don't know. So automatically I'm like, none of this is gonna work, right? So I pitch it along the bank, and it's just running along the, like probably 3 feet off the bank and probably 2 to 3 feet of water. Perfect steelhead water. And it just drains, and I set hook. And I'm like, dude, I gotta fish. And this is like November, right? It's like super early winter steelhead. I'm like, dude, I gotta fish. We were like targeting coho and steelhead. This fish just tore me up. It ended up being like 15 to 17 minutes on my GoPro when I actually had fought this fish. Like, that is a solid fighting winter steelhead. But this fish was dogging me the whole time. And I'm like, I don't know how to hold the rod because I'm a left-handed reel kind of guy. So I would hold it like in like super awkward places, and it just was totally awkward the whole time. My right hand wasn't functioning correctly, but 15 minutes later we got in an 18.7 pound steelhead, winter steelhead. Scaled it out, measured it. We didn't have a tape measure, nothing, but we did all the measurements. When we ran into another guy who had a tape measure later, but anyways, longest steelhead fight of my life, hardest steelhead I've ever fought, on the wrong reel, Brandon setup, but it was amazing. That thing was a beautiful rosy cheek buck. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that.
So, next question. We're talking bucket list. What do you think moving forward? What's next?
For me, honestly, it's gonna have to be the ocean fishing. It's gonna have to be probably blue marlin. I want to go off of the coast of Costa Rica, and I want to catch these massive blue marlin. 3-hour fights, giant freaking reels, just being salty. I mean, the ocean is vast. I mean, to say that I want to catch like an Argentina giant salmon, yeah, I do, of course, but how about being out there with Mother Nature, as far off of the coast as you can go, crazy weather or beautiful weather, it doesn't matter, whatever the nature decides at the time, and you play tug of war with a blue marlin, swordfish, the way these things jump and tail walk, like dude, it's insane. I think I would do like 7 nights in the ocean on a blue marlin trip, and just hopefully catch one of those 5, 6, 7, 800 pound blue marlin. And then, if I got the money at the time, maybe I'll hang it on my wall.
What's something that you do personally that you would consider unique compared to most? Again, examples, technique, style, etc.
Well, my technique's pretty generic for like a lot of fishermen. I'm just, left-handed reel. I think for me, the most unique thing that I do would be film pretty much everything that I do. I think a lot of guys that go out there, they just go fishing on a regular basis. They wake up in the morning, they make their coffee, they don't think about the camera, right? But for me, when I actually get up in the morning, first thing I do is turn my camera on. Then my alarm goes off, and I'm actually filming my alarm going off. And then I get up in the morning and make my coffee. I set the camera up. I stage it on my counter perfectly to where I can capture the drips coming into the coffee pot. So I'm actively thinking and doing more than most people would on a fishing trip, because I have to plan for charging my batteries, plan for camera angles, plan for what I'm filming, when I'm filming. Just kind of like we're doing right here. It's like we're filming some angler profile videos. Most people in San Diego right now would not be doing this. They would be going to do tons of other things. But for me, I find great joy in doing stuff like this. It brings joy to people like you guys who are big fans of the outdoors and the Northwest. So it's very rewarding what I do. It's just a lot of work, and it's a little unique, right? Because most people aren't doing what I'm doing.
I like it. So last question, simple one. Bait or hardware?
Brandon's probably chuckling behind the camera, and I'm gonna have to go with scenario dependent. What I mean by that is hardware. So I tell you what, if you are inside the Columbia River and the water temp is 68 to 70 degrees, 70 is pretty lethal anyway for salmon, but if you're fishing fall salmon in the Columbia River, I guarantee you that salmon is going to bite a spinner more than it's going to bite bait. It's that natural aggression towards something that's shining and spinning and fluttering and dodging and doing crazy stuff versus just bait. That's just, anyway. So hardware in that scenario. In the ocean, I've seen it go 1 for 1 for a very long time. Meaning, whenever Brandon's on the boat, there's a bait that's always getting bit. But if Brandon's not there, I'm always fishing hardware, so it's kind of hard to tell. But there's days where Brandon outfishes my hardware in the ocean, and there's days when the hardware outfishes Brandon's bait. Like, bar none, Brandon has seen spinfish outfish his bait several times. Also, bar none, I have seen bait outfish my spinfish several times. I think a lot of it has to do with what the weather's doing, what the moon's doing, what the tides are doing, and whether the fish have eaten a bunch the day before, or, you know, so much plays a role into this. But I think hardware takes the gavel on this one. For in the most random situations, hardware will outfish bait, but I think in some situations bait will outfish hardware every time. So I think hardware.
Well, thanks for that, man. That was really cool. Anything else you want to add here before we yeah?
Well, subscribe, like, and share. Unless you don't want to.
Thanks, everybody.